So let's start before we get to living, before indeed we get to films. I wanted to start really with the very idea of you being an actor, Bill, because I know that it wasn't something that you decided upon, that you almost fell into being an actor, and that you were quite surprised to be there, really. Would you say that's true?
That's sort of mostly true, yeah. I've come to a point where I have to, I have a terrible memory, and the only things I remember are the things that I anecdotalized for the boys. So they're all a bit sketchy, and now I'm trying to rehabilitate myself. I'm trying to tell the truth. I mean, the truth is I went to a grammar school, a Catholic grammar school for boys, and we did plays, and there was a drama priest called Father Richins, who we called Little Richins, obviously, and he was very nice, and I was tall, which meant I didn't have to play girls. And also I had a quite unreasonable memory, so I got long parts. And I did write a couple of letters. I thought anything but what they had planned for me, which was basically to get a trade and go to work. And I didn't fancy the idea of that, and I didn't fancy the idea of going to the same place every day for the rest of my life. And I didn't want to know how much I was going to be making in 25 years. So I wasn't terribly good at knowing what I wanted to do. What I wanted to do was to write the great English short story. And I ran away to Paris, like I met lots of young men of my kind of era, in order to be like everyone who ever wrote a book in Paris. And therefore I flunked school. And then I met a girl who was the first girl who'd ever paid any attention to me, and I overreacted catastrophically. And she fired me for over-enthusiasm. I rendered myself completely without appeal. I sort of started a religion on her behalf, which is about the least attractive thing you can do. And she fired me within 3 weeks. But in those 3 weeks, she suggested that I go to drama school. I had no idea what that meant. I'd never been to a play. She took me to the first play I ever went to, which was an all-male version of As You Like It. And Anthony Hopkins played Phoebe. And all the girls' parts were played by men. And it completely confused me, so that when I went to do my drama school audition, in fact, when I got the letter saying audition, I didn't know what the word audition meant. Things were different then. And I took the letter up the hill to her, and I said, I got in. She said, no, that's an audition. You have to go down there. So it was already not going well. And but because I'd been to an all-boys school and only ever seen one play, which was everyone was played by men, I thought I'll give them one woman and one man. And I gave them Eliza Doolittle was my woman. And for my man, I chose what turned out to be one of the most famous women's speeches for auditions in the history of audition speeches for women, which was Viola, who I didn't realize the first line was, I left no ring with her. So we figured, my mate Gavin and I, we stole the complete works of Shakespeare and the complete works of George Bernard Shaw, because they said 3 minutes of classical and 3 minutes of modern. And we figured that must be a boy. It turns out it was a girl dressed as a boy. So and therefore I did 2 women for my drama school audition.
And got in.
I got in. They said, "Could you?" Well, a bloke said, "You chose to do 2 women. That was interesting. Why did you do that?" And I said, "Because I thought it would be interesting."
Perfect bluffing.
You know what I mean? And then I thought, Gavin. Anyway.
So you went through acting school, and the reason why I'm asking you this is that I wanted to kind of slightly unpick the relationship that you had with your kind of career, your chosen career when you were younger, because I know it's not that it was ambiguous, but that you were slightly surprised and a little self-conscious around it. And I've interviewed you before, and one of the things that I did recently is I interviewed you for GQ, and I phoned up lots of people who had worked with you, and they gave me various quotes, none of which I had told you, but I'm going to tell you some of them now. And one of them was Jonathan Pryce, and he said that he was working at the Everyman in Liverpool, amazing theatre, and you did an audition to join the Everyman, which was an incredibly prestigious theatre at the time. Pete Postlethwaite was there, and Julie Walters, lots of people. And when you did your audition, you started it about 10 times. So every time you started, you said, can I just do that again? and then you did it again, and then you said, can I just do this again? And he said, and I quote, that you were either a brilliant actor or a madman, and either way, he decided to let you in, which is possibly good. But I wanted to know what that kind of starting, and again, trying to get it right, where that, it obviously comes from a lack of self-confidence, but something else perhaps.
Yeah, no, I had a complete lack of self-confidence. I had whatever the violent opposite of confidence is. And I'm amazed I even went for that audition. I'd retired. I was selling women's clothing off a stall in Surrey Street Market in Croydon, and it was the cheesecloth summer, if there's anyone left alive that knows about the cheesecloth summer. And we used to sell full-length cheesecloth skirts, and I used to wear one in order to, promote the product. And the bloke on the egg stall opposite, he just despised me because I dressed in women's clothing. But I had to leave I'd retired from being an actor, and a mate of mine had recommended me to Jonathan, who I didn't know anything about Jonathan Price, and I just thought, all right. And I drove the van. I had a Viva van. I drove it up there, and I left somebody on the stall, and I was really worried about the stall because I thought they're going to steal money, or you know what I mean. And so I tried to do the audition as quickly as I possibly could so I could get back in the van and get to the stall. And I didn't have any plans to go to the Everyman Theatre in Liverpool. I just did it to please a friend. And I don't remember starting and stuff, but I used to do that quite a lot because I found as soon as I opened my mouth, it was just terrible. Like you'd say a couple of lines, and it would just be like it would hang in the air, like it was just dreadful. So I was always saying, "Can I just let me start?" It was just panic. And I'm amazed. I remember I had to make. There were lots of people there. There were like 20 people there, and you had to make. At one point, I had to make them into a clock. And make them, like organize them. And I was in such a rush. I got quite, strident about it. And maybe that got me the gig. I don't know, but I was amazed to get the job.
And you got the job, and it was fantastic. The Everyman is a fantastic theatre. You have blossomed, would you say, in
I
that?
wouldn't go that far. That would be stretching it slightly.
You enjoyed it?
No, I didn't enjoy it. I hated it. I lived in agonies of anxiety and paranoia and self-consciousness, and I just waited to get asked to leave. It's a habit I got into over the years, and it went on for a long, long time. In fact, it hasn't entirely left me. But and I went, and it was a political situation. It was a political theatre, which I didn't know. I was an average mess. I didn't know what left and right meant. And when I went there, it got too late to ask anyone. I remember I was reading the Times newspaper at one point, which was like when it used to be that big, and the director came and snatched it out of my hand and screwed it up and threw it across the table and said, "I don't think there's anything for us in there." And that was a clue. I thought, okay, the Times is out. And they were all very, very talented. I was put in this group of people who were conspicuously talented, and it was very, very unnerving.
But from there, you've had a wonderful career. But I'm always interested in that idea of being so self-conscious and nervous about it that you carried on.
I know.
But there's obviously something that you loved in it, or that you.
No. No, I haven't even.
Did somebody tell you were good?
No, not really. I wasn't. I got away with stuff. I don't know why I persisted. It's a mystery, except that I know I didn't want to have the conversation with anybody where they said, "Are you still doing that acting thing? Do you still do that?" And me saying, no, I gave that a miss. I didn't want to have that exchange with anybody. I was too prideful. So, and I didn't have any, I'd flunked school, so I didn't have any levels. I didn't have any qualifications for anything. So I wasn't, and I didn't have any enthusiasm for anything particularly. I wanted to be a writer, and I procrastinate at an Olympic level, and I've made it to this point in my life without ever having put pen to paper, which I'm sort of stupidly proud of in a kind of fucked up sort of way. But apart from that, I didn't want to do anything. I didn't have any hobby. I didn't, have any other idea. I didn't have plan B. So I just kept going because, occasionally they gave me a job.
And when they gave you a job, do you think there's certain jobs that you could pick out where you felt like you learnt a lot on it, or Bill? Well,
no, I'm not being, honestly, I'm trying, this is probably risky, but I'm trying to be honest, which is probably not a good idea in public. I mean, no, there wasn't anything. I don't know. I must have picked up certain things, and I'm sure I did. You know, but when I started to learn things was when I started working with professional actors. Well, obviously I was working with professional actors, but I'll tell you what was a great thing for me was the radio. I did a lot of work on the radio, and they were at one point just about the only people that gave me any work, but they gave me work all the time. So I was always in a room with older actors, watching older actors go to work. And that was big information. And there didn't seem to be a lot of fuss about it. They just went to work. And they did, you know, really good stuff, and they just did it from a standing start, and it seemed to work out. And also, because I was on the radio, I was given parts that I wasn't eligible for if you could see who I was, you know, or what kind of creature I was. So I could use voices and stuff, and I could do accents and things like that. And I found that if I could do a voice, I felt much more comfortable. Whereas I hated my own voice. You know, I disliked most things about myself. You know, I was just in this sort of cult of self-denigration, and it's tricky. It's not uncommon, I don't think. I mean, you know, it's at least I hope it's not just me, but no, but I know it's not just me.
Yeah, and as you were learning your craft, going through radio and stuff, you did, I mean, one of the things that you did a lot of, you started doing plays. And one of the people that I spoke to for the piece that I did was David Hare, who you've got a very long-standing relationship with. And one of the things that he said to me, he kind of agreed with you, actually. He said that when he first cast you on a play for today, that you weren't you weren't someone like kind of Kenneth Branagh who arrived as a fully formed actor, but you were incredibly charismatic, and you were kind of, what he said, learning on the job. I mean, I can quote the whole thing, but he did say that what he felt about you is you learnt on the job, that you learnt every job that you did, you got better, and you got better until you were kind of, you know, the fantastic actor that you are now. And there's something about that it's about being in the, you know, not to sound too modern, in the moment, isn't it? It's like you're learning because you're doing it. It's a doing thing.
Did he actually say incredibly charismatic?
Yeah, I've got it written down. Do you want the full quote?
Yeah, I'd like it.
Okay.
No, don't do it. We'll have to kill ourselves. No, no, I probably did. Yeah, I did pick up stuff, and particularly in front of an audience, and particularly if there were any jokes, because the technical thing of trying to get a laugh or trying to get it better than last night, or all of that sort of stuff, became fascinating to me. The first time I ever kind of started to take myself seriously, like I used to hitchhike everywhere, and I'd hitchhike to Liverpool or Newcastle, and whoever gave me the lift, they'd say, "Where are you going?" I'd never say I was going to a theatre. I'd never say I'm an actor. It took me, I don't know, 10 years before I ever said I'm an actor. I'd say I was an electrician. I'm going to do the electrics in a theatre, sometimes I'd say. Or I'd just blag it and say nothing, you know. But I'd never say it. So I never felt like in a minute I was going to start my life for real. And it was not going to involve the theatre or anything. I just kept going because it was the only gig I got. But then when I worked with David Hare, when I read, the first thing that I read of David Hare's, it's great art, and it was so kind of familiar to me, the way that you experience great art, where you think it sort of taps into something. You almost experience it like memory, like you remember it, or like you were about to say that. But he was so brilliant and eloquent, and the style was so beautiful that I kind of turned pro at that point, because I thought, this I absolutely get, you know. This is not some, you know, I have no enthusiasm for classical work. I mean, I used to quip, don't you hate people that quote their own quips? But, you know, I didn't, they'd say there's a significant absence of classical work on your CV, why is that? And I'd say because I can't operate in those kind of trousers, which is sort of, it's supposed to be a joke, but it's actually true. That's the sad part. If I'm going to appear in public, I like to look my best, you know what I'm saying? But, and I know that's a daft thing for an actor to say, but when I got to David's work, I understood it, and I admired it profoundly. And the thing that I did on the television, I didn't do very well because I was chronically self-conscious, around David because I admired him so much, and around everyone involved. And I'm amazed that I even did it or got through it. But then, you know, he did employ me again, which was, you know, but by then I did have a relationship with his dialogue. I had a real enthusiasm for it, and I found a way of delivering it, you know, and as you say, we've worked together all my life since then, and it's been one of the greatest pleasures of my life.
Yeah. One of the other things that he said is that that it is known, I'm sure many people in the audience know this, that you don't you don't ever watch your own films. We will be playing clips and you won't be looking at them. And and if they were on a monitor here, you would turn away. And there is you know, you've described your self-consciousness. It's obviously linked to that. But also, does that make your relationship with directors, particularly film directors, I'm thinking, because acting on a stage, once you're on the stage, you're doing the job. It's the relationship with the audience. But when you're doing film acting, if you're not watching the rushes or you're not seeing anything like that, then you must be more reliant on the director to know how it's going, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but I'll never have to worry about how it's going because I'm never going to watch it. That's one of the great benefits of not watching. I never have to worry because, I mean, other people can worry about it, and you know, but I'm never going to get to hear about it because I never watch it. Can I just say at the end of just to resolve the David Hare thing, the thing that helped enormously, there were two things that helped enormously with my self-consciousness. One was Ken Campbell. Ken Campbell, some people may remember, was always routinely described as the lunatic genius in the newspapers. And he was a genius. And he was always pained when they called him a lunatic genius. He said, why can't I be a genius like all the other geniuses? Why do I have to be a lunatic genius? But it was just because he had a very original turn of mind and he didn't think like anyone else. And the other thing, because for reasons we don't have to go into now, he didn't really believe in rehearsal. And rehearsal was always the worst part for me because the other actors would sit round and watch you. That was the nightmare. And I was paralyzed. And it was bad. It was all right, kind of all right with an audience because they were sort of in the semi-dark. So you didn't know who they were and you didn't have to see them the next day. But with the actors, they were in your life, and it was just excruciating. But the thing that, and Ken never used to rehearse, he just used to throw you on. That helped enormously. The thing with David was that it was the fact that it was the ideas. I discovered that it was a writer who had, I shared his general view. And then I thought, oh, we're on a mission. You know, I am part of something where I deliver this news, this view, these ideas, you know, and that meant that kind of unplugged my vanity or because it's all about, you know, it's all kinds of the other side of vanity, and that helped enormously. As for my relationship with directors, because I don't watch, there's a degree of pressure to watch because directors want you to see what they've done, you know, they want you to share in it and stuff, and I've tried, you know, I've tried, but the thing is, if I don't watch, everything is great. You know, everything is marvelous. It's a perfect relationship for me. If I watch, it's all stolen from me. It robs me of any pleasure or any sense of achievement or anything. Because and it doesn't matter that it's not logical. It doesn't matter that other people think that it's all right. It doesn't matter. And none of those things apply. Because for me, I know, and I've really, really worked on it, I know that it will steal the experience from me. So I gave it up very early on. I mean, I've had directors do things like directors who are going to be the one that made me watch, you know. I mean, one guy, a quite eminent director, phoned me up and he said, don't be ridiculous, I'm sending a courier now, he's got the DVD, just watch it, grow up, be a fucking, you know, professional. And so I waited for the courier came, gave me the DVD, I put it on the side, I waited 2.5 hours and I phoned him and said, it's incredible. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, he said, there you are, you see? Wasn't so difficult, was it? I said, no, I don't know what I've been doing all these years. You know, it was like that. I once was given, because in the early days, it was all right, because they'd say, there's the cast and crew on February the 9th. And you go, oh, I can't be February the 9th, I can't do February the 9th. Then they start saying, when would you like to see it? We'll set up a screening. You know, they once gave me the whole of a big cinema to watch a film. And this is pathetic, and I shouldn't tell you, but I sat there with my fingers in my ears and my eyes closed, wiggling my fingers when I knew it was my scenes. And I only blew it once at the end when I just thought it was all over. And there was one shot of me looking absolutely, obviously terrible. And that was, but apart from that, I saw none of the movie. I just can't take it. It's not good for me.
Oh, dear. Okay, well, should we play some clips?
I'll put my fingers in my ears.
All right, we are going to play some
there was
clips.
one other time, I must say, when I did watch, because I took my daughter to a screening, who happens to be here, so I might as well embarrass her at least once. And this is not embarrassing, but and we had 2 seats, and I put her in her seat, and I said, I'll see you afterwards. And she said, where are you going? I said, well, I'm going to sort of, you know, hang out in the lobby. And it's a bad look for your dad, you know, what's he doing? He's hanging out in the... And I had to sit with her. She said, don't worry, I'll squeeze your hand when you come on, which she did, which was very nice.
Okay, so our first clip is from the girl in the cafe. So shall we run it and you can go like this?
Yeah, I won't do that. It's too embarrassing.
You tell me what in the name of Christ is going on. Who the fuck is that woman?
I'm sorry, I'm terribly sorry.
No, I mean it. Who is she?
She's just a girl I met in a cafe.
Well, is she? Is she? Because it seems to me we've come to Iceland, lock ourselves in this bloody hotel to get away from lunatic protesters, and now we've actually brought one especially with us who at every turn attacks the only man who is committed to doing something which she cares about, namely me. Gerhard looked like it was going to explode. Talk to Robert, Lawrence. I can't talk to you now.
There is a security issue here, Lawrence. Can you vouch for her at all?
I'm afraid I can't, not officially. I haven't checked her passport, as it were.
We do have to make sure she's not planted here to disrupt.
Absolutely.
And even if she isn't, she is disrupting things.
I can see that.
And I think you will have to ask her to leave.
Right. Certainly. Can it be tomorrow?
I'm not going to negotiate with you about departure time, Lawrence. You decide what you think is the right thing to do here.
Right. Right. I am truly sorry.
And I'm sorry to say it's already a little late for that.
You all right, Lawrence?
What can I say, George? We have a pair of unfortunate situations here. A man who has nothing in his life except his work, that is unfortunate. And then by a stroke of bizarre chance, he finds someone who makes that not true for a day or two. But then suddenly it seems as though the price that has to be paid for that ray of light is some kind of disgrace. Doesn't seem quite fair.
Okay, so you played Lawrence there, who and there was Ken Stott, who played the Chancellor of the Exchequer, not just the Chancellor. It was written by Richard Curtis, directed by David Yates, and it's a tie-in essentially with Make Poverty History. So that, to me, is very interesting, given what you just said about David Hare, because it is obviously not political with a capital P, but a cause that one might believe in. And I was wondering about the idea of, do you think that drama can change people's thinking?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think everybody thinks, as you know, the way that our minds work is the result of movies. You know, I think it causes a great deal of pain and misery. It also is inspirational and can, however, you know, marginally, can shift public thought or individual thought without question. Yeah, and I think they're very, very important. Plays, any, you know, whatever the medium might be.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it doesn't seem to change, MPs' minds, perhaps, but it perhaps changes well, the minds or the feelings of people who are interested in culture, at least.
Yeah. Yes, I believe that's true.
Okay. So David Yates, who directed that, you also worked with him on State of Play as well, which was a fantastic series about, all hacks love State of Play because it's about journalism, so all journalists love State of Play. And you played a newspaper editor in there.
Yeah.
What particularly do you enjoy about working with David Yates?
David Yates was great. He's from St Helens.
They don't know where that is. I do. Merseyside.
Miranda knows where that's from. He's a very, very nice man, and I've worked with him 4 times in very different things. And he does, and he's a terrific director, and he was very good with me. And I don't know that we ever had much great discussion about things, but he was always very, very good. One of the things about working with Richard Curtis, you have to be careful on that film, was that he, I remember one night he said, "Where are you going?" I said, "I'm going to go for dinner." He said, "Where are you going for dinner?" I said, "I go to this Thai restaurant up the archway." He said, "Who are you going with?" I said, I'm going on my own. I got a book." He said, "You go on your own?" I said, "Yeah." Some people think that's spooky, that you go to a restaurant on your own. I go to a restaurant, most actors know about reading a book in a restaurant all over the world. You spend a lot of time on your own. And he said, "Well, that's very sad. Don't you have any?" I said, "No, because, everybody was away at the time, And then the next day I came in and there were 2 pages, and one of the pages said, "Thai restaurant, he eats alone." They built a set. They built a Thai restaurant, and I had these lonely papers that I was doing, these government. So you have to be careful when you hang out with writers.
That's very true. I mean, we're going to talk about Richard Curtis in a bit, but one of the things he is amazing at, and I was thinking about that with that clip, is he's really good at giving, speeches. That was a short but very devastating speech that you had there. I mean, it must be enjoyable to...
Yeah, no, it's absolutely, it's marvellous. And The Girl in the Cafe is one of my favourite things that I've been involved in. And I thought it was, and it was, as you say, it was the film of the campaign. It was one of the most successful charitable enterprises in the history of such things was the Make Poverty History campaign, which the idea was that this generation, or these 3 generations, could, and it's entirely possible, could end poverty. People will tell you it's too complex, it's not possible. They are mistaken. It's entirely possible if everybody combined, cooperated, and focused. It would not. It's absolutely achievable. And that was the film of it. It was very. There used to be a thing on the television called News Review, where I was once in a film where they allowed me to sit on a sofa and they played News Review in the story, and I was allowed to say anything I wanted, shouting at the screen. And I did, and I shouted every word you can imagine at this screen, and then they cut it. They didn't put it in the movie. But that's my relationship with News Review. But I came home one day, and I never used to watch it. Why would you sit watching critics sit in a circle? And I would always, zap it. And I didn't zap it quick enough, and the guy was saying, "There are 2 things this year that I've absolutely hated," and I was in both of them. And one of them was The Girl in the Cafe. He could not stand The Girl in the Cafe because it was about, and there is there in this country. It didn't happen in America for some reason. I don't think that makes them spiritual giants and us not. But there was something about the idea of helping that really gets to certain people. It just really, really gets to them. And I don't quite understand it. And I've tried really hard to understand it, and I can't. But I just report it. What was your question?
It was actually, I think, ages ago about the power of the speech, really. Oh,
yeah. Well, Richard writes, I must have been very, very good in a previous life because, I've worked with Richard Curtis, David Hare, many other writers, and I get to speak some marvelous things. And in this particular case, there is a speech in there which I know he put in, because I was playing it, about the Rolling Stones and about how my fantasy was that I go to a Rolling Stones concert and Keith Richard couldn't make it. And somebody shouts out, "Is there anyone in the crowd who can play the tunes?" And I go, "Well, I think I probably could." It's like that. That was, he put that in just for me. I mean, it was a legitimate part of the story.
Yeah.
But,
Okay, we've got another clip coming up, and this is from page 8. So should we have that clip?
What are you thinking, Johnny? What have you been thinking?
Why did you ask me what was I thinking? It's unbelievable. Someone who's meant to be responsible, someone who's meant to be my boss.
I thought it was funny. You don't need to tell me.
Well, it isn't funny. Not in a fucking lift.
Anger management, Johnny. I can send you on a course if you like.
I don't ask you what are you thinking.
Because my mind's a perfect blank, that's why. Things are that bad, I got home last night and watched the X Factor.
Yesterday was Tuesday, X Factor's Saturday, so I know you're lying.
Not lying, testing.
Okay, so page 8 was directed and written by David Hare, and it's part of a kind of trilogy where you play Johnny Warwicker, who is an MI5 man. And I have often thought that perhaps David just wrote this just to make you happy, really, because you kind of dash around in amazing suits and you are... I mean, it's a very cool part. Yeah,
it is like, I did think, is this, it is like that. You think, what did I do, to deserve this? I got to smoke in the rain on Battersea Bridge, herbal cigarettes, just for the record, and, wear a very good coat, and be a spy. And I'd waited a long time to be a spy, and to work with Sir Michael Gambon, who, who I did declare some time ago, to be the leader of my profession. I went to see him in a play which transported me, and his performance completely thrilled me. And I wrote to him and I said, I now consider you to be the leader of my profession. And he wrote back saying, thank you for your support. I'm wearing it as I write this note. He also used to creep up behind me in the canteen at the National Theatre and say deeply profane things which were encouraging. He'd say, I saw you last night, you fucking little bastard. And that would keep me going for 18 months. Michael Gambon called me a bastard. So, but he was, he is, touched by genius. There was a moment where we did a scene in an office, in a darkened office. I get very moved by Michael Gambon. When we meet, we both, I think it's the same for both, I don't know, but I find it very moving because I admire him so tremendously. And it was a very simple scene which didn't require any great emotion. But he was sitting in the dark as my boss, and I was sitting in the dark with my back to the camera, thankfully, because he spoke, he started to speak, and I started to weep. It was totally inappropriate. There's nothing in the script that says he weeps. And I just got tears in my, and I couldn't do anything about it because I was on camera, And then at the end of it, David Hare, who was directing, came round and just went, Michael. And, as if to say, what am I supposed to say? It's just, thank you or whatever. And Michael just went, fuck off. Leave me alone. Let's do it again. Things like that.
Okay, I'm just conscious of time, so I'm going to bang through a couple more clips before we get to Living, because I really want to talk about Living. Okay, so this is About Time, written and directed by Richard Curtis.
And so, a toast to the man with the worst haircut, but the best bride in the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Tim and Mary.
I wish I'd said I love you.
You did, Dad. It was implied.
I'm not sure implied is good enough for a wedding day, yeah?
No, don't do it. It's fine. I'm so happy with it as it was. You really don't have to.
I'll do what I want to do, young man. Will you excuse me for just one moment?
Later on, I may tell you about Tim's many failings as a man and as a table tennis player. But important first to say the one big thing. I've only loved 3 men in my life. My dad was a frosty bugger, so that only leaves dear Uncle Desmond, B.B. King, obviously, and this young man here. I'd only give one piece of advice to anyone marrying. We're all quite similar. in the end. We all get old and tell the same tales too many times. But try and marry someone kind. And this is a kind man with a good heart. I'm not particularly proud of many things in my life, but I am very proud to be the father of my son.
So I have to say that makes me cry. That is another beautiful speech by Richard Curtis, and it's an interesting film, isn't it? Because the idea behind the film is how to live your life well and happily behind all the time travel. That's kind of what it's about, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny. I read two things around that period. One was a Martin Amis novel called, I can't remember, but anyway, there was at the very end of the book, all kinds of stuff happens, and at the very end of the book, a young man says to his girlfriend, she says, "I'm going to take a shower," and he says, "I'll just put the." I was going to put the kettle on. She said, "Well, I was going to take a shower." He said, "Well, I'll wait for you when you've finished your shower." And that's the end of the book. And it's very moving. It's just like normal. You know what I mean? It's just like tender and normal. And similarly, at the end of this, I think Donald receives a phone call from Rachel McAdams who says something like, "Do you want chicken in the risotto, or do you want? Oh, well, I can't remember what it is. It's something like that." And he says, "I don't know. What do you think? Should we have chicken?" Or something like that. And it was those two things, they were expressing the same thing, which is this is normal shit. You know what I mean? This is profound.
I mean, what it is really is about how do you live your life without getting, sent into ordinary pits of despair or ordinary kind of like, I don't know,
negative,
huge peaks and troughs, and how do you live your life in a way that's going to keep you happy? That is kind of what it's about.
Yeah, I know. I don't know how you do that, but no, it is about that, and it was very, and it's entered the language, and it's easily now, because I don't have a car and I walk everywhere and I meet a lot of people, it's easily the film that most people talk to me about, and a lot of young people talk to me about it, and a lot of people say they left the cinema and called their dad, obviously, and the things like that, and it was, it really hit the spot. It was also very, very, very big in South Korea.
And I read this.
No one could work out why it was so big in South Korea. And eventually a South Korean person explained that it very much followed their Buddhist guidelines, they felt. And that also the father-son relationship is a very treasured thing, which is in every culture, but that's part of the reason, apparently.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that About Time, like I think actually many Richard Curtis films, doesn't always land so well with the critics, but always tends to land incredibly well with audiences. Yeah,
the critics find it, I always imagine, 40-something male critics who've just finished painting their bedroom black. And who like films about suicide and shit. You know what I mean? Like real stuff. It's like Richard used to say, films that tell you how bad things can get are often described as searingly honest. Well, how about films that describe how good things can get being searingly honest? But it's just bullshit. It's just like tabloidy stuff that's entered the language and everybody gets confused. But people don't care. People want to hear from Richard Curtis, and they flock to the cinema, fortunately.
Yeah. Okay. So we have another clip. This is from Pride, and then our final clip will be from Living. So let's have a look at Pride.
For God's sake, leave him alone. He's not a girl's world.
But we love him, Mum.
Okay. Design speak.
It's called the Great Atlantic Fault. And it starts here in Spain, and then it goes under the Bay of Biscay, and then it comes up in South Wales. And then it goes under the Atlantic for miles and miles and miles, and it comes up again in Pennsylvania.
My father used to talk about it.
Yeah.
And mine.
A dark artery.
That's it, yeah, that's it. And you could take a miner from Wales or Spain or America, and you could show them that seam and they would recognize it. There's no other coal like it. It's perfect, pure. Yeah. I lost my younger brother to that pit. 36 years old, but without it, these villages are nothing if finished. That's what I'd say if I ever came face to face with Margaret fucking Thatcher. That's what I'd tell her. The pit and the people are one and the same. Welcome home, son. Thank you.
Okay, there's a couple of things I wanted to ask about. The first one is actually, I mean, possibly a bit boring for you, but when you've got to do an accent, how do you go about it? Do you have somebody, is there somebody that you call, or do you go on YouTube, or how do you do it?
Well, what I used to do in the old, I still do. I mean, now it's an iPhone. I used to have a little recorder. You go where they are. And I went to South Wales prior to the filming, and I went in lots of pubs and said to the guys in there who were of an age to remember the miners' strike, or you know, or anyone who might have been associated with it. But they didn't have to. They just had to have an accent. And I would say, you know, worryingly, how would you feel about coming out to the car park and sitting in my car? And I've got these painful tapes of people sitting in the car, you know. When I've got a whole, I just had my lines, or just my lines on a couple of pages. And they'd be quite loud in the bar, you know, they'd be like, you know, all that. When you get them outside, it's like, what do you mean, like, no? Do I say, what like that there? Do I say that? And you go, yeah, and they go, oh, and they do it. And it's very touching. But yeah, so, and that story was a big story, obviously. It was about two things that are close to my heart. One was the fact of the miners' strike, which was almost entirely misrepresented at the time because you couldn't get any sense out of anybody. Margaret Thatcher declared decent working men and women as enemies of the state, quote, if you can imagine such a thing. And the Sun newspaper in those days was at liberty to describe any gay person as the slime of society. That's a quote. And so it's only 30 years ago, so I think it's a sort of important document, particularly for young people to know how, you know, there's been great developments. It's not there, and there's lots of people trying to drag us back and trying to invent nostalgia for that period, which is their one idea, because it's easy, because, you know, and people are, it's easy, it's possible to manipulate people with that. But the emancipation of gay men and women in my lifetime is one of the great developments that you would want to tell your grandchildren that you did nothing to impede. You know, in the same way as maybe the civil rights movement in America. And these are the great developments, you know. And again, there are people trying to drag us back, but those things happened, and they happened while I was around, kind of thing. And this story, which is entirely true, and everyone that was in, all the real people was shown the script, and they all absolutely endorsed it, and said, this is what happened. And, you know, and the writer, Stephen Beresford, was very, very conscientious in that regard. And he made it funny, you know. And it was, I was very proud to be a part of that film.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me as well what parts of, you know, the UK's history gets taught, it gets
we have an almost mythical idea of what's been happening to us in the last few decades.
Yeah.
It's almost entirely invented.
Yeah, whereas like if you make it into a film like that, these with real people, Mark Ashton is a real person, Jonathan is a real person, then people understand what it was. Although I just have to say, it was about 40 years ago now.
Oh, 40 years. Oh,
it used to be 40. Nearly 40.
Yeah, but you know.
I remember it too. So, okay, look, I feel, you know, we are really here to talk about living, and I feel like we should have a very short clip of living. And then we can talk about it. Let's do that.
Well, this I will put my fingers in my ears.
No, it's only short.
Oh, it's a silly nickname. I don't think I'll tell you.
Oh, no, you've come this far. You have to tell me.
All right. Remember your promise to not get angry. Mr. Zombie.
Mr. what?
Thank you. Mr. Zombie. I saw a film about it with what's-her-name. Zombies are sort of like Egyptian mummies, but they can walk and go about doing things. They're sort of dead, but not dead.
Mr. Zombie. Why?
I'm so sorry, Mr. Williams. That's really wicked of me.
You mustn't be upset, Miss Harris. Mr. Zombie, it's rather good. It's quite appropriate, in fact. I like it. Mr. Zombie. An Egyptian mummy. Except I can move about.
Your Knickerbocker glory.
Thank you so much.
It's a lovely film. For those of you who've seen it, I'm sure you agree. It's an absolutely beautiful film. You are great in it. One of the things I really enjoyed about this film, which is it's a remake of a Kurosawa film which was made in 1952, and this is set in 1952. Just to do a quick recap for anyone who hasn't seen it, and Bill plays a civil servant who has a kind of revelation about his life, and I don't want to do spoilers, but you know, things change. He lives a kind of very tight life, and then something changes. It's interesting to me that he's a kind of very unheroic. I mean, he becomes heroic hero, isn't he? I mean, quite just a normal man.
Yeah, and I think, and I'm interested in that, and I'm interested in playing those kind of characters, because there is a degree of heroism for all of us. You know, just getting through the day and considering, you know, mortality. And I'm moved by it. I'm moved by it, and that the constraints in terms of which still exist, but were extreme in the 1930s, 40s, 50s in terms of public conduct and personal behaviour. And it's interesting that it was transposed from Tokyo, and you know, it's originally a Tolstoy Russian, obviously, short story, and then interpreted by Kurosawa, and then by us. I'm interested, I'm fascinated by it, and I'm moved by that kind of, that sort of extreme modesty of, you know, the kind of, it's not modesty in fact, but just that performing of manners and the kind of, and the restraint that we required of ourselves in terms of emotion. And it is admirable in certain ways. I'm sure, you know, psychiatrists would declare it deeply unhealthy, and you know, and it almost certainly was. But I also find it funny. I think it's funny, you know, and it's not. And people always call it Englishness, but I'm sure there are characters like that in every culture. But you know what they mean when they do call it that. And from an acting point of view, it's quite interesting just to be confined and to have to express quite a lot with not very much.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of constrained by duty almost for a very long time, isn't he? And then the circumstance happens, and there's a point in the film where he tries another kind of character out, doesn't he? He meets Tom Burke, who plays a character who's loose and exciting, and Mr. Williams tries to kind of join in, doesn't he?
Well, I don't want to spoil it for people who are going to go and see it.
No, that's what I'm trying to hold back on things, but
yeah,
you know, we have to talk a little bit.
But yeah, he does, and I mean, it was born of. I was invited to dinner by Stephen Woolley and Elizabeth Carlson, who produced this film, who are the great, you know, amongst the great British film producers of all time, and I'd made 2 films with them before, and I was invited for dinner, and I fell asleep on the sofa. And I knew that the other guest was the Nobel Prize-winning novelist Kazuo Ishiguro. So, you know, not the night to fall asleep. I fell asleep and the phone rang at 9:30 saying, "You are coming? Are you coming?" And I was in central London. They were way up in North London. I didn't get there till 10:30. You know, it was terrible. On the way, or rather the day before, I'd been Googling around for music on my phone, and I found out that Greg Allman had done a cover version of Bob Dylan's "Going, Going, Gone" on his final album, because he knew he was dying, and he made this album, and not surprisingly covered "Going, Going, Gone." And when I got to the table, and I was pretty, you know, sort of in awe of Mr. Ishiguro, and he didn't address any remarks to me. And then somebody was asking me about songs, and I mentioned "Going, Going, Gone." And the very first remark that Kazuo Ishiguro ever addressed to me was to say, "Greg Allman does a really good version of that on his final album."
So you were like, "I like you."
I was like, you know, you're almost certainly the only Nobel Prize winner who knows that. Should I know? Anyway, he was very nice, and at the end of dinner, he said, "I know what your next film should be," and then it turned out to be this.
Ah, okay. So, well, I mean, how fantastic. So,
Yeah.
yes, without unpicking the plot of the film. I'll rewind back from the kind of Tom Burke section, but the idea of an ordinary man being a hero is something that is that is interesting, and actually does remind me slightly of that about time kind of feeling. It's like, how can you live your life, a small life? Most of us have small lives, don't we? How can we live our lives in a way that has some kind of meaning? Yeah,
they all have something in common, and I think it is the great subject. You know, how do you not live in the past, and how do you not fear the future, and how do you make the most of the minutes you're in? And you know, everybody's involved in that in one way or the other. All of us, you know, and I have good days and bad days, and good minutes and bad minutes, like everybody else. You know, it's that irritating thing that people say about, you know, try living every day as if it's the last day of your life. Well, you know, I can't do that. I don't know if anybody else has had any success at that. You know, you just want to say, shut up, leave me alone. You know, it's like all those improving things they do for advertising now, like inspiration, or, you know, no such thing as failure. Oh, fuck, well, you know, leave us alone. But it is seriously. Sorry, I rambled slightly there. But I know it is about that, and it's largely, and it's about procrastination too. Which, and as I said earlier, I procrastinate at an Olympic level. So, and I'm interested in how an individual tendency of that kind, or not of that kind, that particular individual tendency that I think we all struggle with procrastinating, you know, varying degrees, how that's expressed in society, and how institutions are formed in order to, you know, huge buildings are built in order to house institutions which are specifically designed to stop stuff from happening. You know, governments are formed in order to do the same thing. A lot of their activity is to arrange for things not to happen. You know, passing the buck or whatever. You know, the bureaucracy involved. And I'm just interested in how that kind of forms. You know, all those things form around what's, you know, a human trait.
Yeah, and how it ends up filling people's lives.
Yeah, I hope the film is inspirational. It's not. It makes it sound like some exam you have to sit. It's not. You know,
it's really lovely. It's a lovely film.
Early signs suggest that people come out feeling slightly better than they did when they went in.
Give him the hard sell, Bill.
He said hurriedly. No, but it's true. I mean, it is, because you never know with certain things. You think, I hope this is... But actually, as a mechanism, it works to embolden people rather than, you know, depress them.
Yeah. Okay, give me a moment that you enjoyed through making in making Living, and then I'm going to see if any of you've got any questions, so think of questions.
Are you out of your mind? No, well, there was one moment. It was the first thing I'd done since COVID, and it was my first job back, and I found it very affecting. And I was standing in a stairwell with about probably 35 other men. Mostly, I think they were all men. They were all wearing a bowler hat like me, and they all had a briefcase and an umbrella. And they were all the extras, you know, and the sun was coming through a window, and I was exhausted, and like always, and I was rendered philosophical. And it was just, and I was very proud of us all that we were back, and we were making this film in the middle of a pandemic, and whatever, you know. And there were all the extras, and the bloke next to me was talking about flares in the 70s. And he was saying, you know, you couldn't even see the shoes. The trousers were so wide, you couldn't see the shoes. You know, it was like that. And there was all this stuff going on. And my heart went boom. And these guys have known me since I was a kid. You know, I've known these guys since I was 24 or something, you know what I mean? And we're still at it. And we're still there. And it was just, and they were all beautifully dressed by the legendary Sandy Powell, who's the many times Oscar-winning costume designer. And it was a very, 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 you know, desirable situation. No, he is a liar.
Is he?
No, Bruce, I did audition for Bruce Robinson to be in With Nell and I believe I came second. And that's all. And I wasn't very good. Not very good. It was one of those occasions where I couldn't do it. I was too self-conscious, and I knew I was being bad during the audition. It was just awful. I mean, that was the story of most of my auditions. I mean, I was very bad at auditioning, and and it was a big disappointment at the time. But no, but then later we worked together in a film, and he was an actor in a film with me, and we did a film called Still Crazy, and he was the legendary, charismatic, impossibly good-looking guitar player, and very good he was too. I think probably, I don't mind, it's good fun being a vampire, because you get to, you get to do stuff like that, which I'm always happy doing stuff like that. But I think probably I like to play, regular human beings, probably more than the quieter kind of guys that, struggle. I'm good at paranoia, self-consciousness, disabled by, shyness and, terrified of women. I'm good at that. That's really my area.
It's not entirely your area, though, is it?
No,
really? I mean, let's face it.
I've helped. Yeah, no, there was a period. You have periods in your life. There was a time where I played 6 journalists on the trot when I was in my 20s, because everybody go, journalist. Well, that bloke, he plays journalist. Bill Nighy, you get that. And then I played in my 30s. I played men who were a nuisance around women. We need a nuisance around Bill Nighy. Would do that.
There's a point where you're playing kind of roue rock stars in dodgy trousers as well.
Well, there was. How dare you? Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's true. I generally hang out. If I'm not working, I'm quite good at not working. You know what I mean? I'm not. I like it. The perfect situation is if you're not working and you've got a job coming up. That's the kind of perfect situation. And I hang out. I don't do a lot of spectacular stuff, but I like cafes. And I like cafes probably as much as I like anything else in human society. And I like bookshops. And that's really pretty much all I do. That and I used to hang out in record shops, but they're gone. But I listen to music and I read books and I drink coffee. I'm afraid that's as sort of wild as it gets, but it's pretty delicious actually. And I like looking at paintings. I don't know too much about them, but I get a kick out of looking at paintings. So I sometimes take trips and I'll go to Paris sometimes, or Copenhagen. I went once to look at. You're in trouble when, once I had a holiday, it's like I went to, but I had to invent a reason, and paintings became the reasons, the sort of purpose for going anywhere. Yeah, that was a great period for me. That play was a great experience for me, and Anthony Hopkins played a character, a South African newspaper tycoon. And I've never seen anyone act better than that. And it was very, very funny. It was a big fat comedy. It was the first contemporary play ever to be done in the Olivier. And I was his Australian sidekick. And one of my great lines in it was, "How's it hanging, Bishop?" Which I claim I wrote. I think I wrote that line, which is not, anyway, but David thinks that he wrote it. I'm sure he did. But it was very good fun, and it was great. And there was a scene at the beginning of the second act. Tom Stoppard and David Hare both have a theory of what to do after the interval, where the gin is just making its way around the people's brains. You know what I mean? When they come back from the bar. And the theory is to hit them with 20 jokes as they sit down, and then continue with what you want to inform them about afterwards. And the bit after at the beginning of the second act of Pravda, is Tony Hopkins in a kimono with a 7-foot bamboo pole, practicing a fictional martial art called Toyinka. And if you are reckless, and you wear shorts to the theatre, you can sit in the front row of the Olivier, and if you want to, you could cross your ankles on the stage in front of Anthony Hopkins. You could do that if you want. And one guy did do that while he's carrying a 7-foot bamboo pole. And at one point, he brought and Tony used to do this thing of screaming in impenetrable Japanese. He'd do stuff like that. And he saw these. I saw this guy's ankles. I thought, gee, are you out of your mind? And he brought this pole down violently 2 inches above the bloke's head. And the bloke's legs retreated into his torso. And the whole of the audience could see it. And and no one could breathe, for a moment. And this bamboo cane was just hovering above his head. And he's going, like that. And my next line was, "People are beginning to worry about you, boss." And for about 30 seconds, I was in theatrical bliss. I was in heaven. I didn't want to say the line because I didn't want it ever to end. Because I had the perfect solution to this terrible situation. It wasn't terrible. It was just the guy, how dare you? You know what I mean? Anyway, so I said the line and it just went off like a bomb. That's my fondest memory of the whole affair.
And with Anthony Hopkins, I remember talking to David Hare about this actually, and he said, because Anthony Hopkins is immense in this role, and right from the start in the rehearsals, he was fully like that. Was there a sense that you had that really, in that situation where you've got Anthony Hopkins like absolutely going for it, that you have to step up to it? Oh, God,
blimey. Not half. I mean, it was terrifying. I mean, he said he played it as a combination of a lizard. He used to do this thing with his tongue. He was playing, a horrible person. And I think Stalin and Hitler. Those were his role models. So, you know what I mean? It gives you some idea. He used to do this thing of smelling people, which is the most offensive thing. If that was a person, he'd go up and go. It's like the most offensive thing you could do to him. I've stolen it. I've done it a couple of times in plays, including to Andrew Lincoln, who happens to be in the audience tonight. I did it once in a thing. But he was, and David, as soon as Tony started, he knew all his lines, he did the thing, as you should, before you start rehearsals. And he did all it. He went off like a bomb. And then David took me quietly to the side and he said, "I think you might have to find something physical to go with what Anthony's doing." So I had to quickly work up something overnight, and I got a funny walk and doubled my accent. I don't know that we should entirely give up hope. I really hope. I mean, the thing was that the brilliant man who wrote it, he wrote Shameless at the same time. In the same year, he wrote Shameless. Paul Abbott. He wrote Shameless and State of Play. And there was planned a second series of State of Play, but Shameless went off like a bomb. I mean, State of Play was very successful, let's just remember that. But Shameless really went off like a bomb. And so that was dearer to his heart because that was his personal experience. It was a more or less an autobiographical affair. So he chose to focus on that. Let's not entirely give up hope, but probably not. I'm just a fan. You
can do air guitar.
I'm very good at air guitar. In fact, at one point, I was asked to enter the air guitar world championships. and I don't know why I'm not surprised, but they take place in Finland. No disrespect to Finland or Finnish people, but it just seemed perfect. And they wanted to do a documentary of me entering the air guitar championships, but I declined because I thought it might make me look stupid. I used to air guitar all the time because it was social death when I was young. If you air guitared when I was young, you'd never get a girlfriend. You know what I mean? It was over. It was one of those things. But then just when I got old enough to make it hopefully ironic, I used to air guitar all the time. But no, I can't play anything, but I'm crazy about music, and I wanted to be in a band, and I was in a band briefly, but we never really got out of the garage.
What was the band called?
They were called, are you ready? They were called, and the boys hated it. I had to name them very quickly, and again, it's the irony was lost on my bandmates. They all went, what? We were called the Love Ponies. And there was actually, originally, later, there was an anthem called Hey, Hey, We're the Love Ponies. And people say we pony around. And because of the Monkeys, there used to be there's no one left alive that knows any of this. Monkeys. Well, there used to be a song called Hey, Hey, We're the Monkeys. So we had Hey, Hey, We're the Love Ponies. And people say we pony around. Yeah,
Yeah,
and,
fame did not beckon that way.
Yeah, no, it did not.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't. I'm not. I don't have a process in that way. When people talk, when I was young and used to be on tour, and you'd be in like digs and stuff, and people would sit around, actors would sit around talking about acting, you know, into the early hours and all that. Whenever they started talking about their process or their method or whatever it was, I would put the kettle on. You know what I mean? It was my shameful secret was that I didn't have one, and I was too frightened anyway to even get around to thinking about acting. You know, the only time I thought about it was when you were put on the spot and you had to do some. I didn't want to think about it in between times because it was too alarming. So I don't have any, I have an approach, I suppose, and I suppose it's pretty much the same. I just learn the lines. I don't want to be cute about it, but I go over and over and over and over and over the lines. I don't do any other thing like, and I try and imagine what that imaginary person might do in that imaginary situation. I've got old enough now that I can say, you know, and I do it because it's, and this is the last time I'm ever going to do it. But they often in a certain kind of interview, they ask you about 3 things, and they're always the same 3 things, you know. And they're like, you know, what research did you do for this project, and how did you get into character? And because I passed a certain age and I made some money, I was at liberty to say, because you have to dissemble when you're a younger person, in my view, because it's not popular. But I would say that, you know, if you ask me now, at this time of my life, how much research I've done, the answer is absolutely none whatsoever. Because the information I require is in the script, and you know, and if I need any other extra, you know, I'll go and find it. I'm not against it, but reading around the subject, as writers know, is actually not writing. Do you know what I mean? And it's similarly with acting. You know, it's an action. You know what I mean? And the theoretical side of it doesn't. It doesn't help me. It makes me nervous. But I understand. You know, I understand that other people find great, you know, value in that. And the thing about being in character, and this is sort of, you know, it's just me being slightly, but it's also true. You know, people say, "How did you get into character?" I'm all right with the word character, but it's the word into I don't understand. I don't know what that means. I've never knowingly been in character in my life. I've heard great things about it. But it's outside of my experience. I know about pretending to be someone else and doing stuff and having to change your, you know, all that, the sort of practical side of it. But I don't know. I really don't know. You know, like becoming someone else. I've never, you know, I don't know what that means. I'm sure, you know, there are people that, you know, work in that way, and it's great, and it's, you know, whatever. But it's outside of my experience.
Okay, so there. Okay, I would like to say, because I'm aware of the time, thank you to you, lovely audience, for turning up. You've been a really receptive audience, and we're very appreciative of that. I'd also like to say that Living is out, if you don't rush over to the South Bank, it is out on November the 4th, so you can catch it there as well. And I'd also like to say a fantastic thank you to the wonderful Bill Nighy.